All right, guys, bang, bang. I have a very special treat today. Miss Pattie Sellers is here. Thank you so much for doing this, Pattie.
Thanks, Anthony.
For the one or two people who are watching this who have no clue who you are, let's start off with kind of just a quick summary of your background and then what you are doing today.
Sure. I joined Fortune a couple of years out of college, over 30 years ago, and was a writer for many years and rose through the ranks to senior writer specializing in profiling masters of the universe. I mean, I did a lot of Fortune 500 companies, but I wrote about, like world changers and entrepreneurs and a lot of the tech entrepreneurs. And I rose to, assistant managing editor at Fortune, which is one of the top positions. And in the process, built something called Fortune Most Powerful Women with an increasingly big and fantastic team. And then almost 5 years ago, went off and started my own company with a woman named Easton from Fortune. It's called SellersEaston Media. And that's my story in a minute.
Very efficient. Let's start off with the SellersEaston Media today, because I think what you guys are doing is a very kind of unique twist on storytelling. So just give us kind of an overview. What do you guys actually do today? And then we'll go backwards and kind of how you got there. But what exactly is Easton Media?
So SellersEaston Media is a very sort of high-end content creation company that we say we tell stories of leadership and impact, and we work with the kind of people and companies that I spent my whole career writing about at Fortune. And think about like what you do as a journalist. You write stories, you appear on stage, you interview people on video. It quickly became a multimedia job. We decided 5 years ago, hey, everybody wants to be a storyteller today. You don't need traditional media to get your story out there. You can pick your audience. And for all the stuff that people are putting on social media, the quality is fine for the purpose, but for people who want to produce content and put it on a platform to reach 5 people or 5 million people, there really wasn't anybody out there who had the sort of interviewing, storytelling skills that Easton and I have. And so basically, we sort of hung our shingle. I was told recently that that's a term that like young people don't know, but I still use it. We hung our shingle and we started a company that basically kind of transfers what we were doing for the public at Fortune and carries it to a private market. So we have clients who are companies, Fortune 500 companies, a lot of small investment firms. We've done work for hedge funds and companies that have a sort of high-end audience and want to reach them in a sophisticated way, whether it's through writing video, filmed interviews, podcasts. And we work for wealthy families too, and some nonprofit work. But, it's basically people who want to put their message out there in a sophisticated way and, really care about, we say, and we've lived up to this, we tell stories of leadership and impact, and we believe that a life well lived is one where you make a positive impact on the world. So not to be too Pollyannish about that or self-important, but we do tend to have those kind of companies as clients and people.
So you are incredibly humble, and won't say this, but I will. The Rolodex that you have built over the years literally encapsulates the world's most powerful and successful people. You've spent an entire career writing about them for the public, as you described. And now you tell a lot of those stories in a more private setting. Can you give us maybe one or two examples in terms of, you don't have to name names, but the types of products that you guys build, right? So I'm cheating because I know about kind of the books that you put together or the documentary style content, but maybe just give us a couple of examples of some of the work that you guys have done.
Sure. Well, I've done several projects for John Mack, the former CEO of Morgan Stanley. he has 3 children, and he wanted to tell his father. So he was CEO of Morgan Stanley until 2010, and he carried the firm. He spent most of his career there. He carried the firm through the 2008 financial crisis. And, he sort of picked, and the board picked, James Gorman, who is doing such a good job there now, as his successor. But he is the son of incredibly poor Lebanese immigrants who came to this country with his father, started selling pots and pans door to door out of a pack on his back. And John grew up with a father who had a wholesale grocery business, built it from scratch in North Carolina. And so we do these filmed life story interviews, we call them. So I interviewed John, and fewer than probably 5 people have seen this, although he allows me to talk about it. And then I did his wife, Christy. I did her story, filmed interview, and then I've worked with him on a couple of other projects, including a book project. I did a similar filmed life story interview for Susie Buffett, Warren's daughter. And I've come to know Warren Buffett really well over the last couple of decades and know the whole family. And Susie, who has talked a lot about her father, if you Google her, you'll see videos of her talking about her father. And she has a foundation, and she's an amazing, wonderful person. But she had never told her story. And her kids, who I know, found out that Pattie Sellers is doing that. So they said, Mom, you got to do that. So I did that for her. And again, probably 5 people have seen that. And then I've done several other, like billionaires. I mean, this is our most popular product, in that it takes, as I said to John, I said, let me come over to your house with a small TV quality camera crew, and we'll be done by noon. And we were, and he had a lunch that day. And a few weeks later, we clean it up, we put pictures in. We also do, I can't tell you who the client is. It's a very big name in Silicon Valley, former CEO of a Fortune 500 company who's very well known. We do this service called Modern Family Portrait, where every year we do a family film. So we go every year to their home. They have little kids, and we capture the family over a couple of days, playing, eating. I interview them, and we're doing this over, probably more than a decade for this particular family in Silicon Valley. And then we do a lot of corporate work too, and we do work for some nonprofits. We're doing a huge project for the University of Texas right now, and so it's great because it's truly multimedia. I mean, we're living in a world where if you can tell your story one way, and you kind of get it down on video. I mean, Anthony, your podcast is also it's filmed interviews. You put these on YouTube. So the more you can repurpose this content, the better. And you just need sort of good interviewers like you to start, and then you can splice and dice it.
I'm learning everything from you. Don't worry.
You're good. You're really good.
Let's back up a second and talk about, where did your fascination come from in terms of wanting to better understand what I'll call kind of the most successful people and companies, and also wanting to tell their stories? Like where did that interest or intrigue come from?
I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the daughter of a dentist and a housewife, and an only child who was very shy when I was growing up. But, my parents had me when they were 39 years old, which back then was old. And I grew up around adults, and I was very comfortable around adults and shy around kids. And I knew no business people. Like, my father's friends were doctors, mostly doctors and, independent business people in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I think I grew up observing a lot. and watching people. And then I went to University of Virginia, and I just like, my parents thought I should be a lawyer because I asked so many questions. But I thought about that, but I loved writing. I loved asking questions. So I got a job with a startup business newspaper in Northern Virginia. I wanted to write about people in the arts. I had no interest in business. And, but I kind of fell into, this was like the only job I could get. And I found I liked business. I liked writing about people in business because these people are smart and they can get things done. So 2 years later, this is 2 years out of college, I applied to Fortune, Forbes, Business Week, and Inc. magazine, which was just starting up. And I worked at this Washington Business Journal with a woman who was on the founding team of Inc. magazine. And I just thought she was so cool. Her name was Susan Currier. I don't know if she's still around. But anyway, she was so cool and so nice to me. And I just, I thought, wow, I want to work for a business magazine. And Fortune hired me. They were the only ones, the only ones to hire me. And I started as a reporter in 1984. And it was a company that was like famous for the Fortune 500. It was a magazine famous for the Fortune 500. And I was like not that interested in writing about companies or things. I wanted to write about people. And over the decades, I just kind of found my niche. And I was the person who, more than anyone there, I spent years chasing some people, like wanting to get the first exclusive story about them. And I did. I mean, I'll just throw out three names. Melinda Gates, Oprah Winfrey, and Martha Stewart when she was in prison.
So I want to play a game with you. And I think as we play this game, we'll unpack kind of a lot of the techniques that you use to do this and really become the best in the world at it. Let's start with Melinda Gates. So my understanding of the situation is Melinda Gates had done press before, but never kind of exclusively by herself in a profile format, right? No one had ever written the Melinda Gates approved profile of her. You were able to successfully do that. How do you meet her? How do you convince her to do it? And then what was the process like actually writing that kind of first exclusive profile of her?
I spent a couple of years talking to and writing letters to the Gates Foundation and her people. And she had done quite a lot of press with Bill as they were building the Gates Foundation, but she had never agreed to do an interview for a profile about her. So I wanted to do the first major profile. And I don't know, finally I got in. I remember I went to Seattle the Monday after, or the Tuesday, I guess it was, after Labor Day in 2007. And I remember the new head of PR for the Gates Foundation was a woman named Heidi Sinclair. She's one of my closest friends today. I stayed friends with her. And she was like her first week on the job. And Melinda was so nervous. And I ended up interviewing Melinda like 3 times for that story, once in New York. And I interviewed Bill in Seattle separately for that. And I interviewed, a bunch of that. And Melinda was great though. Like she let me talk to her best friend. I went over to her best friend's house on the lake and, to her house and like had coffee, and we're sitting in the kitchen and I'm talking about Melinda. And like Melinda had never told her story. Melinda had never talked about how when she was young, right out of Duke and Duke University and working at Microsoft, kind of low level, and she was walking across the parking lot someday and she saw the CEO, the founder, Bill Gates, and she said hello to him, and he asked her out. And anyway, they fell in like she really dished. And oh my God, it was fantastic. They lined up Bono for me, and I remember I talked to Bono, and so it was great. I mean, they really went all out. And then the story came out right at Christmas time, and I got the nicest email over Christmas from Melinda, telling me she was with her parents, and her parents actually loved it, loved the story. And that was a cover story. And that was, like the ultimate, like quintessential, like brand of stamp of approval. And then my mother died 3 weeks later. And my mother loved that story. That was like her favorite story of all that I had done. And that was, I had been at Fortune for 24 years at that point. So, 84. Yeah, I had been at Fortune for 24 years at that point. So in a quarter of a century, that was the favorite story so it holds a lot of meaning to me for various reasons.
Yeah. And what was like the biggest surprise to that whole process, right? Once she agrees, you go and you talk to everyone, you talk to Bill, you kind of hear all the stories. Was there one thing that kind of stood out to you that was either a surprise or you didn't really understand until you had done all the work?
So I forgot too. I already knew Warren Buffett well at that point, but I had never been out to Omaha. So I went out to Omaha for that story. I mean, I could have interviewed Warren on the phone, but I think I said to him, I said, this would be a good chance for me to finally come out and, see you in your office. So I went out, and they had announced the giving pledge together, where Warren, who did not expect to give any of his money away until he died, and he thought his wife Susie would die. He thought he never imagined that he would outlive his wife Susie. So here he is. He lost his wife. He has all this money, doesn't know what to do with it, doesn't know how to be a philanthropist. He says it's harder than making money. So he announces, this was a few years before the story came out, he announces that he's giving all his money to the Gateses to distribute because they're experts. So anyway, that's why, and obviously, as most people know, Bill and Melinda and Warren are really close. So I went out to Omaha, and here's the answer to your question. Warren tells me how, to an extraordinary degree, Melinda kind of, first of all, convinced Bill to give his money away during his lifetime. And, I can't remember the details, but convinced Warren also of the value of that, because there are all these diseases around the world, and children are dying, people are dying every day. And, let's not save it. Let's put it to good use. And Warren there's that sort of aha moment. Wow, that's what we should do with our money. But Warren loves Melinda because Melinda has done for Bill what Susie did for Warren, which is basically take a nerdy guy who is like all business and all numbers, and finds the kind of humanity in him. And so it's one of the reasons that Warren and Bill are so close. And it's one of the reasons that Warren and Melinda are so close, because he sees a lot of Susie and Melinda.
I love that story.
Yeah.
You and Martha Stewart while she's in jail. Tell us that story. That is absolutely epic.
Oh, geez. I had met Martha in 1998 when I did a story it was a cover story for Fortune called Women, Sex, and Power. And it was an idea that I had to do a story about. I literally walked into the office of the top editor at Fortune at the time, John Huey, and said, I think we should do a story about women who are doing better than men. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, women who are like doing amazing things that no man has ever done or no man. So anyway, long story short, through that story, I met Martha. I actually had a sort of an evening with her and two of her friends, Charlotte Beers, who was the head of Ogilvy and Mather, the big ad agency at the time, and a woman named Darla Moore, who I ended up doing a cover story about the following year. Do you know who Darla Moore is?
I do not.
Anthony? She would be of interest to a lot of your listeners because she was the wife of the late Richard Rainwater. Do you know who Richard Rainwater?
I do.
Yeah, big self-made billionaire. But anyway, so I met Martha in 1998, one night at the apartment of Charlotte Beers with Darla Moore in New York. We started 2 years later. Fortune started Fortune Most Powerful Women, which started as a list of the 50 most powerful women in business. We put Martha on the list for several years. She was building her empire. Then she lied about a stock trade and she got convicted. I went to the trial. I was in touch with her during the trial. I knew her. I had written about her. She got convicted. She got sent down to a prison in West Virginia for 5 months and then served 5 months house arrest. And during the time that she was in prison, and by the way, I mean, I think that it was sort of a travesty. I mean, she lied to investigators and she paid really, really big. And I'm just going to fast forward for a second. Like the way she handled that provides lessons for us all in dealing with adversity because she handled it in the most amazing and quite frankly, classy way. But anyway, when she was in prison, I wanted to do the first story about her after she got out of prison. And I ended up sending her magazines every week through her assistant, who sent a bag, I think, every Friday down to West Virginia. And so I would send over to Julia at Martha Stewart Living on Media a packet of the magazines at Time Inc. We used to get them. They'd all be displayed. We could all grab them. People, Time, Sports Illustrated. And I would put together a packet every week and send them down. And Martha really appreciated it. You know, this was before, I mean, this was like 2004. I mean, the internet, people were reading on the internet, but not as much. People were really still like reading physical magazines. So anyway, she got out of prison. They wouldn't let me see her. There was a whole army of PR people around her. No. She's not doing interviews. And she called me one day and she said, come on Monday morning. I think she called me like on a Saturday. And she called me, she said, I'll talk to you. Let's talk about this story you want to do. Come Monday morning. And I got a dial car, one of those like 777 cars. This was long before Uber. Got a car, went up to Bedford, New York, where she lived. And I remember right as we were pulling up, I got a call from her PR person, like her head PR person. Oh my God, what are you doing? Martha just told me she called you and invited you. Oh my God. So Martha did this like totally behind the back of her advisors. And it was great. She was wearing her ankle bracelet and we talked and she said, let's go down to the stables. She said, I only have like 20 minutes before I before I violate my leaving this house or whatever. And we jumped in the car and we went down to her stables and she showed me around. And I ended up getting the exclusive. Like, we did a cover story where the cover line was, it was a quote from her. And the cover line was, "I cannot be destroyed." That was the line. Great picture of her and that line in really big print. Oh my gosh, she just hated the cover line. She loved the cover picture, but she hated the cover line. But it was true. And she could not be destroyed. And so anyway, I mean, I really like Martha, and I see her, every once in a while. I mean, not like one-on-one. I see her at events. She continued to come to our Most Powerful Women events when we were doing them live. Now we're doing them virtually. But, I just admire her. One of the things that always helped me as a journalist was I found I liked more people than other journalists liked.
Why do you think that is?
I think I'm more open and trusting and accepting and optimistic than most journalists are. And that's both a blessing and a curse, because early in my career, I'm no longer a journalist. So it's little bit less of a concern for me, but I was always afraid about kind of being taken and being gullible. Anthony, you don't know me quite well enough, but if you want to pull a practical joke on me, pretty easy.
That's fine. Listen, you got to have fun in life. Every once in a while you get got, but you did a pretty good job of avoiding that professionally. Ted Turner is a fascinating character. I've read the book. I think that he wrote his autobiography. And he's one of these,
Ted.
Yeah, he's one of these guys who obviously most people know him as for CNN and kind of the media side, but everything from the American Bisons all the way down. Just a really fascinating guy. Tell us,
biggest bison owner in the world.
Yeah, how did you meet him, and kind of what were the interesting parts there?
How did I meet Ted? I think the first time I met Ted was when I did a story I did a cover story in the, maybe around 2000 or so, 20 years ago, about how big time business people, sort of even bigger than Fortune 500 CEOs, sort of masters of the universe, kind of detox, relax, get away from it all. And John Huey, who was the top editor of Fortune at the time, knew Ted. They were both from Atlanta. And he called Ted and he said, "Would you let Pattie Sellers, come to Montana?" So I think that was my first time meeting Ted. I went to Montana, and he was married to Jane Fonda at the time. And I remember we had lunch and Jane was serving these bison burgers, and it was just so bizarre. I mean, it was just, and then we went out, and I'm in this vehicle with Ted. I mean, his ranch is practically the size of Rhode Island. I mean, this is a ranch. Anyway, I mean, I basically did, it was kind of puff journalism, but we had a fantastic photographer with us. And we ended up taking that day, I remember, Jane Fonda's favorite picture of Ted, of all time. And then I did a story. So he ended up, Time Warner. So Warner Brothers bought Time. Warner Brothers ended up owning Time and Turner. Okay, Turner, which is CNN, TNT, TBS, the whole media empire. Ted Turner was to television what name a tech entrepreneur is to, so Time Warner ends up owning us and Turner Enterprises. Time Warner does a merger with, this is like 20 years ago, with AOL. Okay. Worst merger in history. The stock went from like 100 to 10. Ted was such a loyal soldier. He never diversified his portfolio. He never bought, I don't think in his whole career, Ted is like in his late 70s now, or maybe he just turned 80. But I don't think in his whole career, he ever owned a stock outside of Time Warner. Okay. So he loses $8 billion. Ted lost $8 billion on one stock. He was the second biggest landowner in the United States, so he still had assets, still had money. So I did a story then. Ted knew me, he trusted me, and I did a cover story that we ended up calling Gone with the Wind. And the cover line was, Gone with the Wind, Ted Turner sounds off on losing $8 billion, his job, and the love of his life, who was Jane. And he got pushed out as vice chairman of Time Warner. And so anyway, I ended up spending a lot of time with Ted at one ranch and on his, he has a huge, it was called a plantation at the time. It probably is not called that anymore for kind of social
obvious reasons.
Yeah, but he had a plantation in northern Florida. And I went down there and spent time with them. And the house looks like Tara from Gone with the Wind. He's obsessed with, he had bought MGM, so he could own Gone with the Wind. But anyway, he was just, oh my God. He talked about how he had been suicidal. And it was just, it was great. He's one of the hardest interviews that I've ever done. And I've interviewed him many, many times, but he's not a normal kind of guy. But sometimes the world's greatest entrepreneurs are people who are certainly not normal. And at the time, he was so obsessed with Rupert Murdoch. And he kept saying to me, like probably 10 times in the course of my interviewing him, Rupert Murdoch is the most dangerous man in the universe. Ted is very liberal, and, Fox News was beating CNN in the ratings, and it was just killing Ted.
So this is interesting because one, you knew Ted pretty well. Getting somebody to do a cover story about losing $8 billion to the love of their life and their job is probably no easy task. And I can only imagine the complexities with interviewing them during a time like that. But you also knew Rupert Murdoch and had written about him as well. And so maybe tell us that story and then compare, like, how do you kind of balance, right? You know multiple people in these stories and know them pretty well.
People who don't like each other.
Yeah. And so just like, how did you meet Rupert Murdoch? And then, was Rupert Murdoch, when you're talking to him, yelling and screaming about Ted Turner, or does he not even really care? How does that work?
No, Rupert is, it's so interesting. Ted obviously like thinks big, but Ted gets, kind of gets obsessed with things. Rupert is just completely different from Ted. So I had not met Rupert at the time. I can't remember what kind of incentivized me or got me wanting to do a big Rupert Murdoch interview, but I got to the point in my career, and this is maybe 10 years ago, where I had been at Fortune for, 25 years. I had chased a lot of people. I had done 2 cover stories about Oprah, who had never done a business story. She was another one that was like on my list. I was frankly running out of people who I was dying to write about. And so, I don't know, Rupert Murdoch was fascinating to me. And I ended up doing in 2000 and I don't know, 14, maybe 13, the first sit-down interview, public sit-down interview. He's done some private stuff for sort of like private conferences and stuff, but public sit-down interview with Rupert. And I think it had been like 6 years or something. And I'm not sure that he's done another one in the last several years. It's kind of, anyway, I did it with him in his office in New York, and he was fantastic. And he talked about, he talked about everything. He talked about his children, his difficulty with his children, the sort of rocky relationships over the years, his marriage he talked about. I was kind of stunned. But, one of the things that I like about interviewing people at this level who are not Fortune 500 CEOs. Now, he is a Fortune 500 CEO. He's a Fortune Global 500 CEO, but he controls, nobody's telling him what to do. He's an entrepreneur. I love interviewing these people because they talk more freely. They talk more freely, and they're more courageous in their views. And I just never wanted to be strapped down by doing I did plenty of I grew up writing about Coke and Pepsi and Kraft and Kellogg and all those companies, and they were fine. But I always wanted to capture people really authentically. And I felt I could do that with these people who kind of played by their own rules.
Yeah. The last person I want to talk about before I kind of ask you some questions just in general is Alex Rodriguez, who I know you're close with. You wrote a very big article on him in Fortune magazine at a time in his life where I think he was kind of going through multiple transitions. So he'd been banned by baseball. He was also kind of sitting out for the year because of the baseball situation. He had gone from, hero in the media and the sports world to kind of, shunned a little bit. And then he was also focusing on the investing.
A little, more than a little.
Being kind. But also had kind of aspirations from a very young age, really, to kind of be successful in the business and investing world. And it seems like had really kind of hit the gas pedal on, he had a capital base, but he wanted to learn. He wanted to go and do this. So maybe talk a little bit about, one, just your relationship with Alex, how you met him, but also two, writing about somebody in a time where it was a complicated story, right? It's not kind of one single story to tell. How did you kind of navigate that?
I met Alex in the lobby of the Hilton Omaha, the Omaha Hilton Hotel in 2014, which was the year he was banned from baseball. And he was very quiet that year, and he was using that year to kind of get his head together and learn. He took college classes. He went to conferences. He went to the Milken conference in LA. He went to the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. He went to some other business conferences. And it's the weirdest story. And yes, we're actually now doing work for his company, A-Rod Corp at SellersEaston. But just going back to that moment, which is just, it was kind of an amazing moment because I had just flown in from Los Angeles where I had done something on stage at the Milken conference. And I had heard that morning that Alex Rodriguez was in the audience during the session that I did, and how Alex was telling people that it was his favorite session at the Milken conference. And I'm like, what? That's kind of cool. And And Alex at the time, this was pre-Jennifer Lopez, and he was the guy, he was the legendary baseball player who was banned, okay? And there was an aura of mystery about him. So I go to Omaha for the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. This was like May 1st, 2014. And I'm standing in the lobby talking with two friends, like at the bar, at the side of the bar. And I'm telling them, I'm like, yeah, I came in from the Milken conference in LA, and Alex Rodriguez was apparently at my thing. As I am saying this, Anthony, I swear, I'm not embellishing this story. As I'm saying this, Alex walks by. And I go, oh my God, there he is. There's Alex Rodriguez. So I step forward and I go, Alex. And he turns around. And we're about probably 20 feet away from each other. And he stops, turns around. I approach him and I said, Alex, I'm Pattie Sellers. I said, he goes, I know who you are. I was at your session yesterday. And I said, I heard you were at the session. And I said, thank you for coming. And thank you. He said, yeah, it was fantastic. And so anyway, he gives me his card. We're standing there talking like 5 minutes or so. He's giving me this guy. I said, is this really your email address? And he goes, of course it's my email address. I'm giving you my card. And I'm like, all right. And he goes, he said, I've seen you on, he said, I've followed your stuff for years. He goes, I've watched you on video. I've seen you interviewing Marissa Mayer on video. And he pronounced Mayer correctly, which is always a sign. The former CEO of Yahoo. A lot of people say, a lot of people say Mayer, but it's Marissa Mayer. So anyway, I ended up seeing him the next day during the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting at a lunch. And we talked, and he said to me in the lobby that day, he said, I don't care if I'm ever in Sports Illustrated again. My dream is to be on the cover of Fortune. And he said, that's long been my dream. And he said, I started my company back in 2003. And he said, I started buying apartments. And he has thousands and thousands and thousands. I mean, I think over 15,000 apartment units now, as well as a huge venture business he's invested in, over 50 companies. And he's done very, very well. And he has a big team, and it's called A-Rod Corp. And so anyway, long story short, I ended up doing the first interview that he agreed to do after he was banned. He had not talked to the press. So he said, I'll give you the exclusive. I didn't know if I could trust him. He came through. And we did a great interview here in New York. He was living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan at the time, and we did an interview at his apartment building. And then we started the company, and so we're actually doing some work for him now. And he's a great guy. He's really a great guy. And I met Jennifer recently, and she's wonderful. And so anyway, it's just interesting getting behind the curtain of these people who are, I think I'm drawn as a sort of recovering journalist, I'm drawn to people who are not understood. They may be controversial. And I just, I think there are some people who I think there are, a lot of good people who make bad decisions and it changes their life.
Yeah. There's two themes in the times that we've talked that I think I've been able to pull out. And you mentioned one of them at dinner the other night, which is all of these people work really, really hard. And I think that one of the public kind of expectations is, oh, that person got lucky. Doesn't matter if you're an athlete, if you're a business person, nobody wants to believe that kind of the secret ingredient to a lot of success and ultimately creating a powerful person is hard work. So maybe talk a little bit about just, you've literally seen behind the curtain, spent hours and hours, if not days, with many of the world's most powerful people. Talk a little bit about the work ethic and kind of how that might surprise people to see really what these people do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, okay. I mean, just taking Alex, he works all the time. I mean, all the time. And it's impressive. And I mean, some of these like former athletes have, investment firms or companies where there isn't a lot behind the curtain. And I mean, boy, Alex he is, as hard as he worked to become the number 4 home run king in MLB history, he is working just as hard he wants to be Warren Buffett. And Warren is his role model and they're friends. And the thing that surprised me about Alex when I first met him is he is insatiable in wanting to learn and wanting to improve himself. And, as I said, that year that he was banned from baseball, he spent it literally going to school and going to these conferences. And he just wants to learn. And he has a little bit of a dreamy attitude about college, which he didn't go to. He actually got a football scholarship to the University of Miami, and he passed it up to go with to be a professional baseball player. But anyway, so he works super hard. Martha Stewart never stops. Oprah never stops. One of the things that helped me a lot in being a journalist who could write about these sort of billionaires and world changers, and helps me as a co-CEO now doing private work for them, is I have never, ever, like one iota, wanted to be them. I have never been jealous of any. I've been in countless billionaires' homes. I've never been jealous for a second. I've never wanted that. To me, money brings, I know you have an audience, Anthony, who, people who care about money, want to make a lot of money. For better or worse, I never have cared about that. I love doing the work. I love the process. And I have a co-CEO now, Easton, who kind of chides me like, this is about making money. And she cares about the work equally. But so, a lot of these people who, whether you're talking about Ted Turner or Martha Stewart or Alex Rodriguez or Oprah Winfrey or, tech entrepreneurs, I met Steve Jobs. Of course they want to make money, but none of these people are in it to make money primarily. These are all people who want to either make their mark, change the world for good, or prove themselves out of some insecurity.
Yeah. I think that is a thing that when you unpack most people, you just nailed it. But in order to be able to unpack that, you've got to build trust. And you've mentioned a couple of times here, trust in the sense of either you've got to be able to actually trust the people that you're going to do a story on, or they need to be able to trust you to kind of not screw them over or have any sort of gotcha type situation. Talk a little bit just about how do you, one, build the trust with them, and then also two, learn to trust them so that you kind of understand that this is a two-way street, and we're going to kind of go on this journey together, really, to create a profile that ends up being one, accurate, but also two, entertaining and valuable for readers.
Yeah. Well, it's so hard it used to be so hard. I mean, I'm talking about like before the internet, back in the 80s when I started writing for Fortune, people would tell me, like, people who, I remember I was at PepsiCo and I was interviewing the CEO of PepsiCo, and the head of PR said, you do interviews like sort of like it's like a living room conversation. It's so intimate. And I'm like, well, how do most people do interviews? I think, first of all, listening, as you know, Anthony, and from watching your show in the past, I've thought countless times, he's a really good listener. You're a really good listener. And that's job one for us, right? I think a lot of journalists have a list of questions and they're like, that does not build trust. What builds trust is listening, being able to step into the other person's shoes, understanding what makes them comfortable and what doesn't, and what will sort of help just open them up. I never did gotcha journalism. It's interesting. We're working right now I'm really sort of jumping right now, but we're working right now. We've gotten into the documentary business at SellersEaston, and I've never actually said this but it just popped into my head. We're working on a major civil rights documentary that we've raised a couple $1 million for. And we're working with a director named Barbara Koppel, who is legendary in the world of documentary filmmaking. And she has won 2 Academy Awards for Best Documentary. And her style is cinema verite, which is basically following people around and being a fly on the wall with a camera. She does straight interviews, but mostly it's, kind of like lurking and capturing what's happening in the moment. Among all documentary filmmakers, she is way, way up there in terms of people trust Barbara Koppel because she is not a gotcha journalist. She wants to, she works super, super hard to get people to trust her. And I just think I've always wanted to do the same thing. I've wanted to capture what people are all about I don't have an agenda. You're sort of doing that with me here. You just want, you're letting me talk, and maybe I'm talking too much.
Not at all.
You're like, okay, what are you about? And that's what I've always done. And that's the way to build trust. And I always thought of my career in the long term. I was careful not to burn bridges. I did little things back when stories were read in the magazine rather than online. I would always send the magazine as soon as I got it. I would send the magazine to the subject, let's say it was Ted Turner, but I would send it to his assistant, his secretary, his da-da-da-da-da, with notes, special, not in one pack, but to them individually. I did a lot of things like to pay attention to the people around the main person, because first of all, we need to respect them just as much as the person who is the subject. And it helped in the long term. I knew I was sort of making a little investment, like, oh, this secretary will, they were called secretaries back then. This secretary will like me.
Yeah. And look, it makes a ton of sense. I think part of what is so fascinating to me is you were ahead of your time in the style of interviewing that you did. Now, you were creating a written piece of content most of the time, but have since evolved to kind of multimedia. But what I hear you talking about is the world of the media, right? Or kind of content in general, because of the internet, has brought positives and negatives. But one of the negatives, obviously, is attention span. And so people have much shorter attention spans, and they want, quick hit pieces. So you get kind of articles written that way. You also get, when people do television interviews, you get kind of 3 to 5 minute, I need you to say something salacious so we can get the headlines and the distribution and like move on to the next thing. And what's fascinating to me, one, just because I generally like to learn in the format that I do the interviews, but there's also obviously very big audiences for other people who are doing kind of these long form interviews, is that it allows for the nuance, and it allows for the details, and it allows for kind of the explanations behind, the headline type perspective or opinion. And to me, that's actually like 80-90% of the value, right? It's one thing to know Pattie Sellers thinks X, but to then hear you kind of explain for 10 minutes, why do you think of that? Do you fully believe that, or do you see the other side of the argument, and kind of really dig into it? To me, that's actually where all the value is. And it sounds like that's how you were able to get such intricate details and really kind of tell a story about someone in a way that others weren't able to, is because you just were able to let them talk and you listen to the details, right?
Yeah. Well, back in the heyday when Fortune magazine was, thick, I always felt that, if you were doing a big story, you could get ideally 8 or 10 pages. And I always felt I had the opportunity to do the definitive story about someone. And that was an honor. And I remember when I did the Melinda Gates story, I felt like I was kind of holding something precious in my hands, because she was very nervous about it. And then the magazine shrunk. I mean, as the internet grew, as digital media disintermediated print media died. Fortune magazine in its physical form is still around, but it's very thin. So this is like, 5-6 years ago. Doing a good job as a journalist at Fortune magazine became writing stuff for the web in the moment, and how many eyeballs did you get on that story that was posted last night? And I was just like, oh God, this is not fun. I certainly cannot do the definitive story if I have one day, or if I don't have a lot of space. I mean, the internet's great. You could write as much, but people don't have the attention spans. And so anyway, that led to the idea for SellersEaston Media, which is, let us use our skills, our interviewing and storytelling skills. And for people who can afford it, we will tell your story as long as you want, as detailed as you want, on your timetable, and you can pick the audience. If you want us to build you a public website, we do that. We build websites. We can help you reach millions. But if you want to give it to your kids, your 3 kids, you can do that too. We ended up doing a really fantastic documentary called Port of Destiny for the president of Colombia. Was a man named Juan Manuel Santos. Okay. He served 8 terms until just 2 years ago. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize for settling with the FARC rebels and ending 50 plus years of civil war in Colombia. An amazing man who, talk about a roller coaster rise to winning a Nobel roller coaster path. Just a dramatic story, blood, guts, murder. Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, who are huge fans of his, were interviewed for it. I interviewed Clinton. We did like a 52-minute documentary. It was fantastic. But his people hired us. This was like in 2017, I think, like 3 years ago. His people hired us because he was leaving office he wanted his story captured, which had never been captured for like his post-presidential life, so he's like shown it at venues around the world and events and stuff. But Joe Blow down the street can't necessarily afford to hire us to do that. But it's for a certain clientele, and our services actually come in as low as, we charge $38,000 for these filmed life story interviews. So, basically we do stuff but it's basically for companies and for people who have a certain level of income to capture their story in a way that they can control it and own it. And we tell it right. We bring our journalistic integrity and our journalistic skills, and we pick our clients very carefully.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that people will always say is like, hey, I know a lot of successful people. When it comes to you and Nina, you guys literally probably have one of the best Rolodexes in terms of the world's most successful and powerful people, to the point where the Washington Post at one point wrote an article that said, I think the headline was something around the Rolodex that redefined power, right? And was kind of referencing just a lot of successful people and powerful people want to be around each other, right? They're kind of, it's a magnet. And you've served as the central point for a lot of this for a long period of time. And Paulina, who has gone to the Most Powerful Women's Conference, has told me that one of your favorite questions to ask people is, what does power mean to you? So this is my chance to flip it on to you and ask you, after interviewing all these people, spending literally months of your life with them, what does power mean to you, and kind of how do you define the success that a lot of these people have accomplished in their lifetimes?
So power, and my definition of power has evolved a bit over the decades. Power to me is what you do beyond your job description. What you do beyond what you are supposed to do, beyond your designated platform and your tenure, what you're paid to do, beyond what you're paid to do. And especially in this world that we're living in right now, where everything can change tomorrow, and you may not have that job tomorrow. So if you can look at yourself, and if you lose your job this afternoon, and you can ask yourself, okay, I just lost my job. Am I still powerful? If you can say yes to that, then you're powerful.
I love that answer. My last question before we get into a set of rapid fire questions to finish up is, you've told the story of the successful and powerful people, and you today in the business that you run help to kind of cement the legacy of many of these people by telling these stories to kind of private audiences. What is the legacy for Pattie Sellers in kind of your dream world? What do you kind of leave behind, or would love for people to say, you know what, Pattie Sellers, she did X?
Boy, that is a really interesting question, Anthony. I actually have never been asked it. And when I interview people, I tend to ask, you don't want to say, what do you want on your tombstone? But I tend to ask, what do you want on your billboard? Okay. And I actually don't know what I would say, but I'm going to answer your question. So I feel I care about making an impact, and I care about making a positive impact. And I believe that the best way I can make an impact on this world, whether it's helping to empower women, which I feel like I've done a lot in that space over the decades by building, being part of the team, co-founding and building Fortune Most Powerful Women, which is now the biggest women's leadership community on earth, the premier. Or, we're doing a film about civil rights leadership in the 21st century right now, at a time when that topic is very timely and important. I'm a storyteller. And if I can help people who are good people and people who live lives of impact, if I can help them get their story out there and even pass it on to their next generation so that their kids and grandkids, and by watching their father or grandfather tell their story, if that can make the world a little bit of a better place, then I feel like I've done a good job. And that's really all I care about. I mean, I'm very happy in my life. I don't want to be wealthier. I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I have a good view out my window, looking out onto Broadway. I don't want anything more. I love working with smart people. I like, one of my rules of sort of career rules has always been work with people who are smarter than you are. Nina Easton, my co-CEO, is smarter than I am in many areas. I'd like to think she'd tell me that I'm smarter than she is in a couple of areas too, but I love that. I'm learning every day. I want to keep learning, and I want to keep helping through this talent I have. I want to help people who actually can make an impact, a bigger impact than they ordinarily would be able to.
You've done a fantastic job. You've told some of the most incredible stories, and I think with such intricate detail that people, kind of the results speak for themselves. Is not only have you been able to get people to agree to do that because they trust you, but I think that it's one of these things where you can trick somebody one time, right? But if you do a bad job or you end up kind of violating that trust, then you don't get a second shot. You don't get any of their friends or anything like that. But for decades, you've been doing this. So it's pretty cool. I finish up each conversation with the same two questions, and then you're going to get to ask me one at the end to finish it. The first is, what is your favorite book, or what is the most important book that you've ever read?
Oh boy, my favorite book of all time. I'm going to mention a book that I just finished. I just finished last week. It's called The Warmth of Other Suns, and it's by Isabel Wilkerson, who just came out with this book, Caste, Caste, that is very high on the bestseller list. Isabel Wilkerson is a Pulitzer Prize winning former New York Times journalist who, The Warmth of Other Suns is about the migration of Black people within the United States from South to North during the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And it was just, it's a beautifully, beautifully written book. And I have certain favorites from, kind of my youth, like The Great Gatsby and, just sort of like classics. But in terms of books that I've recently read, I would say that is important and timely and my favorite.
I love that. My second question is a little bit more fun, which is aliens. Are you a believer or non-believer?
A non-believer.
Wait, why?
I want to add, obviously you're a believer, which makes me want to say, wait, why?
Well, it's just, all right, so I'll go first. It's just a math equation. The galaxy and other galaxies are so big, the probability that we're the only living beings in, anywhere in the kind of unlimited expansiveness of the universe is, in my opinion, quite small. And so if you're just playing the probability game, then mathematically it would suggest it's more likely than not. And then I think that there's this kind of seductive, intellectual curiosity, around everyone wants there to be the aliens, right? And they want to believe that we're not here alone. They want to kind of pontificate about, are we going to meet them, or are they going to come and meet us? And, how does that play out? And, who knows what information and who's hiding the information? Like there's this whole, kind of, I don't know, society or culture around it that I think is fascinating to me personally. But I just fall back on the math. So why don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable to think that way. I mean, everything that's happened this year, I mean, everything, like first and foremost, COVID, has made me think more than ever about our place in this universe. Like there's a lot of stuff this year. Like my mother would have just turned 100 years old. And I think of my grandparents who I knew who I realized, like I never realized this until just recently, that they lived, like 30 years after the Civil War. And it's just so weird to think in this vulnerable place that we are in right now as Americans, with COVID still raging, and the earth at, whether you look at climate change or a pandemic or whatever, how vulnerable we are. And I mean, I guess every generation thinks that they're living through historic times, but what we experienced with, one thing I didn't mention was, who the first person who showed me the internet was?
No, but I would love to know.
Mark Andreessen.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. You got to tell us that story real quick.
Yeah, really quick. I was doing a story in 1995 called "Don't Call Me Slacker." That was a popular term then, and it was about America's most successful 20-somethings. It was an idea I had. This was before the internet, so there weren't many successful 20-somethings. And I interviewed a few people who are still known today, including Jeff Zucker, who's now head of CNN, who was executive producer of the Today Show at the time, 29 years old. And anyway, I went out to California to a company called Mosaic, which was just changing its name at the time. But Mark was this kid who, like 24 years old, it was just changing its name to Netscape. And he sat in the hallway in front of a computer and he said, I want to show you how this works. And this browser, this internet browser that we have, it was the first internet browser that was, available to the public. And he said, let me show you this. And he, there was like a line there. And he said, see that underlined word like Mexico? If I click on that, click, and it took you to like a page about Mexico. And I was like, oh my God. So anyway, we feel like we have lived through amazing, amazing times. Okay. Does every generation feel like this? Okay. So now 2020, we are living through amazing times. And I don't know, it's the first time I'm thinking it could all like go poof tomorrow, but I hope it doesn't, because I'm an optimist.
I think that everyone questions everything in times of uncertainty. I think is a very fair thing. What one question do you have for me to finish this up?
What's on your billboard, Anthony?
I say this all the time. He was happy and he had fun. That's it. Right. It's I'm pretty open, I think, with people, and I tell them like a long time ago, more than a decade ago now, I had the fortunate and unfortunate situation of I went to war, right? And sitting in Iraq, and you kind of go through certain experiences and you realize the kind of mortality that all of us have. And I think it's one of these life experiences where some people take the fork in the road that ends up with, the PTSD and the depression and kind of all the things that we know can happen when people are in those environments. And then other people actually come out in a completely different, kind of end of the road, which is they end up realizing like none of us are getting out of here alive. Right. And so like you might as well go enjoy it and have fun and literally live kind of life to the fullest. Right. The kind of more cliche way of saying it. And when that became like something that really I internalized, I started to realize like, I'm going to do the things that I want to do today. I don't really care about kind of the long-term, aspects of it. I'm not somebody who kind of master plans. Okay, here's my 15-year plan as to how I'm going to, become the CEO of the corporation where I started at the lower level and, then middle manager. And, it's just not my thing. And it also means that when you're doing something, like there's going to be a day I wake up and I'm going to say, this podcast is no longer fun. And on the day that happens, I will stop that day. Right. And I'll literally just tweet out and say, it's over. Had a great run. See you guys. Right. But just this element of having the ability to kind of walk away from things that aren't fun anymore, I think is really important. And it goes back to really just having your identity tied to your name, right? Your actions, not to a corporation, to a job, to any of that stuff. And I think that, you were the rare case where you actually had a corporation for a very long time and then left. And when you left, you've now built a new company with your partner. And obviously, not only has it one gone well, but it seems like you've been able to take all the great aspects of the work that you'd previously done and, kind of wrap it into a new bundle and now give it that to a very specific customer base, which, I'm cheating again because we recently were hanging out and it's obvious you're happy, you're having fun, right? You're enjoying this. And so I think that's kind of like the whole goal of it.
Real power is personal power.
That is a fantastic statement.
And I just, I talked about SellersEaston and Nina Easton and how fantastic a co-CEO she is, but we have a team. We have like 7 or 8 people and they're fantastic. And what I love about this phase of my life and career is that I, pivot. That's what everybody is supposed to be doing right now. And boy, it is fun pivoting and learning every day. And I'm frankly glad that I decided to pivot 5 years ago rather than like, oh my God, 2020s is here. What do I do? I feel like it's good to, but to this point of not planning, Anthony, it's so important. You can't plan today. And, I sort of became famous for this term about think of your career as a jungle gym, which is swing to opportunities, keep your peripheral vision. Do not think of your career as a ladder. Because the next rung on the ladder, you have no idea what that is, if that's going to be secure, given the way the world is unpredictable and changing. Keep your peripheral vision. It might be wise to jump on an opportunity that is lateral or even below what you are now, because it's all about expanding your experience base, and adaptability, flexibility is more important than ever. So it's just, I love what you said about, you're a fork in the road and you made a choice. But what we are doing right now in our careers mutually, I think, is we're learning every day and we're stretching ourselves. And we do have personal power. And we might wake up tomorrow and say, yep, I'm going to do something else. And that's fantastic. We have the power to do that.
I love that. Before I let you go, where can people find you on the internet or find out more if they want to see all the great work you guys are doing?
Thank you. It's SellersEaston.com, SellersEaston.com. I'm at Pattie, Pattie, make sure you add the IE, Pattie at SellersEaston.com. So, I'd love to hear from your friends and fans. And this is really fun, Anthony. Can we do this every day?
I was going to say, that I would talk to you all day long if you would let me. No, listen, Pattie, thank you so much for doing this. I think that people really love this episode. Just not only all the learning from it, but also the entertaining stories. You lived a life that I think many people look at and say, hey, that was a lot of fun. So thank you so much for doing this, and we'll definitely do it again in the future.
Thank you, Anthony. It was fun.